In the unforgiving wilderness of the Wyoming Territory, 1868, a horrific wagon train massacre left no apparent survivors, or so everyone thought. While U.S. cavalry scouts counted 23 bodies, they never found 8-year-old Sarah Thornton. Hidden in a narrow mountain crevice, trembling as she heard the war cries fade into the distance, Sarah would face the coming winter alone. Her remarkable story of survival against impossible odds remained untold for nearly a century, buried in fragmentary military reports and a single, extraordinary diary. This is the forgotten tale of how one child's desperate will to live collided with an unlikely savior, a Sioux hunter who defied his own tribe's traditions to save the daughter of his sworn enemy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Thornton family had little reason to worry as their wagon creaked along the dusty trail that spring morning. The sky stretched endlessly blue above the Wyoming Territory, a perfect backdrop for their journey toward a new beginning. Thomas Thornton, a former blacksmith from Pennsylvania, led his wife Eleanor and their 3 children westward, following rumors of fertile land and opportunity near the Oregon border. The Thorntons had joined the Miller wagon train, 17 wagons strong, filled with families seeking similar dreams of prosperity in the untamed West. 8-year-old Sarah Thornton sat beside her mother on the wagon bench, her legs swinging freely beneath her calico dress. Her blonde hair caught the morning light as she watched jackrabbits dart between sagebrush. Unlike her older brothers who complained endlessly about the journey's monotony, Sarah found wonder in the vastness of the plains and mountains. She collected wildflowers at each stop, pressing them between the pages of her mother's Bible, creating a vibrant record of their trek toward a new home. Ooh. "Look, Papa!" Sarah pointed toward distant thunderheads gathering over the mountain range ahead. "Storm's coming." Thomas squinted at the horizon. "Good eye, little one. We'll need to make camp earlier today. Those clouds don't look friendly." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand. "My Sarah has the sharpest eyes in the family. She'll make a fine pioneer woman someday." Sarah beamed with pride, unaware that her keen observation skills would soon become her only chance at survival. The Miller wagon train had been advised to avoid the Blackfoot Pass, as tensions with local tribes had escalated in recent months. A series of broken treaties and encroaching settlements had frayed the delicate peace. Lieutenant James Harrison at Fort Bridger had warned the group about increased warrior activity in the region, but Wagon Master Frederick Miller insisted the alternate route would add weeks to their journey. "We've got enough men and rifles," Miller had declared confidently at their last campfire meeting. "Besides, most of the trouble's been further north. We should pass through without incident." Thomas Thornton had voiced his concerns that night, arguing for the safer route. "I've got my family to think about. An extra fortnight on the trail seems a small price for peace of mind." "Then stay behind if you're yellow," Miller had retorted. "The rest of us have land claims to file before winter." Thomas had reluctantly agreed to continue with the group, a decision that would haunt him in his final moments. As the wagons approached the narrow passage between towering rock formations that marked the entrance to Blackfoot Pass, an unusual stillness fell over the landscape. Birds ceased their songs. The constant wind that had accompanied their journey suddenly died away, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by creaking wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the oxen. Sarah noticed the silence first. "Mama, where did all the birds go?" Before Eleanor could answer, Frederick Miller's voice rang out from the lead wagon. "Keep those wagons tight, no stragglers through the pass." The Thornton wagon was fourth in line as they entered the shadow of the towering cliffs. Thomas kept one hand on the reins, the other never far from his rifle. Eleanor pulled Sarah closer, while her brothers, Daniel, 12, and Matthew, 14, peered anxiously from beneath the wagon canvas. The attack came with terrible swiftness. The Yai's first warning was a single arrow that struck the lead wagon's canvas with a dull thud. Then came the war cries. Dozens of painted warriors on horseback descended from concealed positions in the rocks above. The narrow pass quickly became a scene of chaos and slaughter. "Circle the wagons!" Miller screamed, but it was too late. The confined space of the pass made the defensive formation impossible. Thomas Thornton reacted instantly. "Get down!" he shouted to his family as he raised his rifle. Eleanor pulled Sarah from the bench, pushing her toward the back of the wagon, where her brothers were already reaching for their father's spare shotgun. "Stay hidden," Eleanor instructed, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror in her eyes. "No matter what happens, stay hidden and quiet." Sarah nodded, too frightened to speak as the sounds of gunfire and screaming filled the air. Through gaps in the wagon canvas, she watched her father fire repeatedly at the attacking warriors, while her mother reloaded his second rifle with trembling hands. When a flaming arrow struck the wagon ahead of them, setting its canvas ablaze, Thomas made a desperate decision. "We can't stay here," he told Eleanor. "The whole train will burn. We need to make those rocks." He pointed toward a jumble of massive boulders about 50 yards off the trail. Eleanor nodded grimly. "Children, listen carefully," she called toward the back of the wagon. "We're going to run for the rocks. Stay low. Stay together." The family waited for Thomas's signal, then leapt from the relative safety of their wagon into the chaos of the Wagon Massacre. Thomas led the way, firing as he moved, while Eleanor pushed the children ahead of her. Sarah ran as she'd never run before, her heart pounding in her ears. She heard her brother Matthew cry out as an arrow struck his shoulder, but their father pulled him up, urging them to keep moving. They had nearly reached the boulders when Eleanor Thornton fell, an arrow protruding from her back. "Keep going!" she gasped, looking directly at Sarah. "Don't stop, my love." Thomas hesitated, agonized, but the warriors were closing in. "Daniel, Matthew, take your sister and climb as high as you can," he ordered, before turning back toward his fallen wife, rifle raised in defiance. The 3 Thornton children scrambled among the boulders, climbing higher as their father's last shots echoed below. Daniel, blood seeping from a wound on his arm, pushed Sarah ahead of him. "There!" Matthew pointed toward a narrow fissure in the rock face. "We can hide in there." The crevice was barely visible, a vertical crack in the mountainside, just wide. Enough for a child to slip through. Matthew, being the largest, struggled to squeeze his shoulders through the opening. "It's too tight," he gasped. "Sarah, you go first." Daniel boosted his little sister up, and Sarah wriggled into the dark fissure. The space widened slightly inside, opening into a small cavern. "Come on," she called back, reaching out her hand. Daniel tried to follow, but a shout from below froze him in place. Warriors were scaling the rocks toward them. Matthew, still outside the crevice, grabbed his brother's arm. "We need to lead them away from here," he said, his young face suddenly aged with resolve. "Sarah, stay hidden. Don't make a sound. We'll come back for you when it's safe." Before she could protest, her brothers disappeared from the opening, their footsteps receding as they deliberately made noise to draw the pursuers away from Sarah's hiding place. Sarah pressed herself deep into the crevice, making herself as small as possible. The rough stone scraped her back as she huddled in the shadows, her hand clamped over her mouth to silence her terrified breathing. From her hiding place, she could see slivers of the carnage below. Wagons burning, bodies fallen. The sounds were worse. Screams cut short, the triumphant whoops of the warriors, and finally the terrible silence that followed. She recognized her brother's voices briefly, defiant shouts that ended in abrupt silence, and she bit down on her knuckles to keep from crying out. As dusk fell, the warriors moved among the dead, taking weapons, supplies, and scalps. Sarah remained, motionless, even when a warrior passed so close to her hiding place that she could see the eagle feathers in his hair, could smell the smoke and blood on his skin. She didn't move, when they drove off the surviving oxen and horses. She didn't move when they set fire to the remaining wagons. She didn't move even when the last of them departed, leaving only the crackling flames and the gathering night. Only when full darkness had fallen did Sarah allow herself to weep, silent tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. Her family was gone. Everyone she knew in the world had been taken from her in a single brutal afternoon. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped rapidly in the high mountain pass. Sarah huddled deeper into her hiding place, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. The thin calico dress offered little protection against the mountain chill. Her stomach growled with hunger, but fear kept her rooted in place. "I'll wait until morning," she whispered to herself. "Papa would say to wait until it's safe." Sleep came in fitful bursts, disrupted by nightmares and the very real sounds of scavengers below. When dawn finally broke, Sarah cautiously peered out from her sanctuary. The sight that greeted her was one no child should ever witness. The wagon train was destroyed, burned husks of vehicles scattered across the pass. Bodies lay where they had fallen, some already disturbed by predators. Sarah searched desperately for any sign of movement, any survivor besides herself, but the scene remained still, except for circling ravens overhead. Survival instinct overcame her terror. Sarah knew she couldn't remain in the crevice indefinitely. She needed water, food, and better shelter. With trembling limbs, she eased out of her hiding place and carefully picked her way down the rocky slope. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She approached the remains of her family's wagon first, hoping to find something, anything familiar, to cling to. The canvas was burned away, the wooden frame charred but partially intact. With shaking hands, she sifted through the ashes, eventually uncovering her mother's scorched Bible, the pressed wildflowers still intact between its pages. She clutched it to her chest and continued her search. In the wreckage, Sarah managed to find a small knife with a bone handle, a dented tin cup, and a singed blanket. More precious than these was a half-burned bag of cornmeal overlooked by the warriors. These became her first survival tools. The hardest task was avoiding the bodies. Sarah couldn't bear to look at the fallen settlers, afraid of recognizing her, parents or brothers among them. She skirted around them, eyes averted, whispering apologies as if they might hear her abandoning them. The sound of running water drew her away from the massacre site. A small stream flowed down from the mountains about a quarter-mile from the pass. Sarah filled her cup and drank deeply, then refilled it several times. The cold water revived her, clearing her head enough to begin planning. "I need to find help," she said aloud, her voice sounding strange after so many hours of enforced silence. "There must be a fort or a town somewhere. But which direction should she go? The wagon train had been traveling west, but Sarah had no way of knowing how far. They were from the next settlement. Going back east meant a longer journey through the pass where the attack had occurred. The thought made her shudder. As Sarah contemplated her limited options, another realization dawned on her. The warriors might return. This thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her small body. She couldn't stay near the massacre site. She needed to hide, to find a place of safety until help might come. Her eyes turned toward the mountains rising to the north. The complex maze of ridges and valleys might offer sanctuary, places to hide that warriors on horseback couldn't easily reach. With this tentative plan forming, Sarah gathered her meager supplies into a bundle using the blanket. Before leaving the stream, she knelt beside the water and splashed her face, washing away tears and dust. Her reflection looked back at her, a small, frightened child with determined eyes. "Be brave," she whispered to herself, words her father had often told her. "Just be brave for a little while longer. With the bundle clutched to her chest and her mother's Bible secured in her dress pocket, Sarah began the difficult climb into the mountains. Each step took her farther from the horror behind her, but also farther from the known trail and potential rescue. Every rustling sound in the underbrush made her freeze, expecting warriors to materialize from the shadows. By midday, Sarah had climbed high enough to look back at the pass below. Smoke still rose from the wagon remains, and the circling birds had increased in number. The sight strengthened her resolve to distance herself from the massacre. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as she ascended. Loose rocks slid beneath her worn boots, and thorny bushes caught at her dress. Several times she stumbled, scraping her palms and knees. Each time she rose again and continued climbing. Late in the afternoon, exhaustion began to overtake her. Sarah hadn't eaten since the previous day's noon meal, and her small body was nearing its limit. As the sun lowered toward the western peaks, she began searching for shelter. Fortune favored her when she discovered a small overhang formed by two leaning boulders. The space beneath was just large enough for her to crawl into, and it offered protection from the wind that had begun to pick up as evening approached. Using her knife, Sarah cut juniper branches to create a crude bed beneath the overhang, then huddled inside with her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She allowed herself a small handful of cornmeal, chewing it slowly to make it last. The dry meal stuck in her throat, but it quieted the worst of her hunger pangs. As darkness fell completely, Sarah curled into a tight ball, clutching her mother's Bible like a talisman against the night. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was addressing, God, her parents, or simply the vast wilderness around her. "Please help me." Sleep eventually claimed her, a merciful respite from the horrors of the day. She dreamed of home, not the promised homestead they had been traveling toward, but their small house in Pennsylvania with its familiar smells and sounds. In her dreams, her mother called her for supper, and her brothers teased her about her dolls. Her father's laughter rang out clear and strong. Sarah woke before dawn, momentarily confused by the hard stone beneath her and the cold mountain air. Then memory crashed over her, and she bit back a sob. Crying wouldn't help her now. She needed to be strong, to keep moving, to survive. The second day brought new challenges. Her initial surge of adrenaline had faded, leaving bone-deep weariness in its place. Each step required conscious effort. Hunger clawed at her stomach, and her throat burned with thirst. The stream was far below now, and she found no water source. On the mountain slopes, by midday, Sarah's pace had slowed to a painful crawl. The sun beat down relentlessly, and her lips cracked from dehydration. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she heard the most beautiful sound, the gentle trickle of water. Following the sound, she discovered a tiny spring seeping from between rocks, forming a small pool no bigger than her cupped hands. Sarah fell to her knees beside it, drinking gratefully before refilling her tin cup to carry with her. The discovery of water renewed her determination. "I can do this," she told herself firmly. "I just need to keep looking for food, and better, shelter." As if in answer to her thoughts, a movement caught her eye, a fat marmot waddling between rocks about 20 feet away. Sarah froze, watching as the creature nibbled on mountain plants. Her stomach growled at the sight. Though her father had taught her brothers to hunt, she had never killed an animal herself. But hunger was a powerful motivator, moving with a slowness. Born of necessity rather than skill, Sarah crept closer to the oblivious marmot. When she was within range, she hurled a fist-sized rock with all her strength. Her aim was true. The stone struck the creature's head, stunning it long enough for Sarah to rush forward with her small knife. What followed was messy and traumatic, but survival demanded it. With shaking hands, Sarah cleaned her kill as she had seen her father do with rabbits. Each step made her stomach turn, but the promise of meat kept her going. That evening, sheltered in a different crevice higher up the mountain, Sarah roasted small strips of marmot meat over a tiny fire. The smoky, gamey taste was the most delicious thing she had ever eaten. For the first time since the massacre, a tiny spark of hope kindled within her. If she could find water and catch food, perhaps she could survive until rescue came. As darkness settled over the mountains, Sarah extinguished her small fire and curled up in her increasingly filthy blanket. The temperature dropped rapidly, and she shivered despite the relative protection of her rocky shelter. She thought of her brothers, how Matthew had sacrificed himself to draw the warriors away from her hiding place. Their final act had been to save her life, and she was determined not to waste their sacrifice. "I'll live," she whispered fiercely into the darkness. "I promise I'll live." Unknown to Sarah at that very moment, 30 miles to the west, a cavalry patrol from Fort Laramie was responding to reports of smoke seen rising from Blackfoot Pass. By the time they arrived the following day, they would find only the grim aftermath of the massacre. 23 bodies, already ravaged by scavengers, and no sign that anyone had survived the attack. And in a village 3 days' ride to the north, a young Sioux hunter named Running Fox was preparing for a solitary hunting expedition in the mountains, a journey that would unexpectedly intersect with the desperate struggle of a small girl fighting to survive against impossible odds. The cavalry patrol arrived at Blackfoot Pass 3 days after the massacre. Lieutenant William Cooper, a veteran of numerous Indian campaigns, had seen the aftermath of attacks before, but the scale of this one left even him shaken. The 17 wagons of the Miller train lay in charred ruins, their contents scattered and looted. The bodies, men, women and children, told the grim story of the settlers' final moments. "Check for survivors," Cooper ordered his men, though his tone held little hope. "And count the dead. We need to know who they were." Sergeant Taylor, clipboard in hand, moved methodically among the bodies, noting descriptions and collecting any identification papers that remained. The other soldiers worked silently, their expressions somber as they conducted the grim census. "Sir," Sergeant Taylor approached the lieutenant after an hour. "We've counted 23 bodies. Appears to be the entire train, based on the wagon manifest we found." He handed over a singed piece of paper. Frederick Miller was the wagon master. "We've identified most of them." Cooper studied the manifest. "The Thornton family, Thomas, Eleanor, Matthew, Daniel and Sarah, 5 members, but we've only found 4 bodies matching their descriptions." Taylor nodded grimly. "The girl, Sarah, she's not among them. She'd be about 8 years old, blonde hair." Cooper scanned the surrounding terrain, his experienced eyes noting the rocky outcroppings where the settlers had made their last stand. The warriors would have taken captives if they wanted them. "If she's not here, could have been animals," Taylor suggested quietly. "Scavengers." Cooper's jaw tightened. "Post additional men to continue searching. If there's any chance the child survived or was taken, we need to know." For 2 more days, the cavalry methodically searched the area surrounding the massacre site. They found tracks leading in multiple directions, the war party splitting up after the attack, but no sign of a small girl, alive or dead. Eventually, Cooper had to make the difficult decision to end the search. "We'll report her as missing, presumed dead," he told his men as they prepared graves for the victims. "May God have mercy on her soul, wherever she is." The troopers buried the settlers in a common grave, marked with a simple wooden cross. Lieutenant Cooper recorded the names of the dead in his official report, including Sarah Thornton, female child aged 8 years, among the victims of the Blackfoot Pass massacre. With heavy hearts, the patrol departed, leaving the silent pass to the wind and ravens. Meanwhile, high in the mountains, Sarah Thornton was very much alive. The first week after the massacre tested every ounce of Sarah's courage and resourcefulness. Her initial success in catching the marmot wasn't easily repeated, and hunger became her constant companion. The cornmeal lasted only 3 days, even with careful rationing. Her small hands grew calloused from scrambling over rocks, and her knees were perpetually scabbed from falls. She established a pattern for survival, moving higher into the mountains each day, searching for food and water, and finding shelter. Before nightfall, the mountain terrain was treacherous for an adult, let alone a child, but Sarah's small size sometimes proved advantageous, allowing her to squeeze through narrow passages and hide in spaces adults couldn't reach. On the 8th day, Sarah's fortunes changed when she discovered a raspberry thicket tucked into a protected fold of the mountainside. The berries were just beginning to ripen, their tart sweetness an incredible luxury after days of near starvation. She gorged herself until her lips and fingers were stained purple, then filled her pockets with as many as she could carry. Near the raspberry thicket, she found an abandoned badger den beneath a rocky overhang. The entrance was small, just large enough for her to wiggle through, but the space inside widened considerably, providing better shelter than she'd had since the massacre. Sarah lined the floor with pine boughs and made the den her home base, returning to it each night after her daily foraging expeditions. The den and berry patch gave Sarah her first real sense of security since the attack. She no longer had to search for new shelter each night, and the berries provided a reliable, if limited, food source. She scratched marks on the den wall with her knife, counting the days of her survival, a small act of defiance against the wilderness that threatened to consume her. As days turned into weeks, Sarah's body adapted to her harsh new reality. Her once soft hands hardened with calluses. Her dress hung in tatters from her thinning frame, but her muscles grew wiry and strong. The initial terror that had accompanied every sound in the wilderness gradually dulled to cautious alertness. She learned to distinguish between the harmless rustle of wind through pine needles and the purposeful movements of animals, or potential threats. Food remained her greatest challenge. The raspberry patch could sustain her for a time, but Sarah knew instinctively that she needed more substantial nourishment. Her father's lessons on wilderness survival, originally shared with her brothers but overheard by her curious ears, now became her lifeline. "Look for plants the animals eat," Thomas Thornton had once advised during a hunting trip. "If deer or rabbits eat it, it's usually safe for people." Following this guidance, Sarah carefully observed the mountain wildlife. She watched squirrels harvest pine nuts and followed suit, spending hours extracting the nutritious kernels from cones. She noted which plants the marmots favored and sampled them cautiously, spitting out anything with a bitter taste, as her father had taught her. Some experimentation led to painful lessons. A patch of tempting berries, different from her raspberries, left her violently ill for a day, huddled miserably in her den. But gradually, Sarah compiled a mental catalogue of safe foods: wild onions that added flavor to her meager meals, dandelion greens that tasted bitter but filled her empty stomach, and occasionally the incredible bounty of bird eggs discovered. In ground nests, catching game remained difficult, with only her small knife and improvised snares made from strips of her petticoat. More often than not, her traps lay empty, but occasionally she succeeded in snaring a rabbit or ground squirrel, and these rare feasts provided critical protein that helped maintain her strength. Water was less problematic. The mountain's abundant springs and streams provided clean, cold water, and Sarah discovered that certain hollow plants could be used as natural straws to drink from otherwise inaccessible crevices. She carried her tin cup everywhere, never passing a water source without refilling it. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Sarah's survival was her mental resilience. Many adults would have succumbed to despair in similar circumstances, but Sarah's 8-year-old mind possessed an extraordinary capacity for adaptation. She spoke aloud to herself frequently, maintaining one-sided conversations with her absent family members. "Mama would say I need to wash my face more," she would mutter while splashing icy spring water on her dirt-streaked cheeks. "Daniel would laugh at how I set that snare. I'll show him next time." These imaginary conversations preserved her connection to her lost family, while also keeping her mind sharp and focused. Each night, she recited prayers from memory, clutching her mother's singed Bible without opening it, too afraid that handling the fragile pages might cause them to crumble. The changing seasons soon presented new challenges. Summer was waning in the high country, and morning frost began to appear with increasing frequency. The raspberry bush yielded its final fruits, and the mountain vegetation showed signs of the approaching autumn. Sarah recognized the implications. With a wisdom beyond her years, winter in the mountains would be brutal, perhaps unsurvivable in her current situation. The realization prompted a crucial decision. She needed to find better, more permanent shelter before the snow came. The badger den, while serviceable in mild weather, offered insufficient protection against true mountain cold. With characteristic determination, Sarah began exploring the surrounding area more extensively, searching for a winter haven. Her perseverance was rewarded when she discovered a narrow crevice in the mountainside, similar to the one where she had hidden during the massacre but much deeper. The opening was partially obscured by a fallen pine, making it nearly invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. Sarah squeezed through the tight entrance, finding that the space widened into a small cave extending about 15 feet into the mountainside. The cave floor was dry, and natural cracks in the ceiling allowed smoke to escape when she built a small fire near the entrance. Most importantly, the narrow opening could be blocked with pine boughs, helping to retain precious heat. Sarah immediately recognized it as her best chance for winter survival. With renewed purpose, she set about preparing her winter refuge. She gathered pine needles by the armful, creating a thick mattress at the back of the cave. She collected firewood whenever possible, storing a growing pile near the entrance. Every edible plant she encountered was harvested and dried, creating a meager stockpile of emergency rations. The work was exhausting, but it kept despair at bay. Sarah's days now had clear purpose: survive today, prepare for tomorrow, live to see rescue. She refused to consider the alternative. As she worked, Sarah remained vigilant. Twice, she spotted distant riders from her high vantage points, whether cavalry patrols or indigenous hunters, she couldn't tell. Each time, she hid until they passed out of sight, too afraid to risk approaching unknown men after what she had witnessed. Her tragic experience at Blackfoot Pass had taught her harsh lessons about trust and vulnerability. By the time the first snow dusted the mountainside in early October, Sarah had transformed from a frightened child into a wilderness survivor. Her once clean calico dress hung in tatters around her knees, supplemented by crude leggings fashioned from rabbit skins. Her blonde hair had grown tangled and wild, with pine sap accidentally matting several sections into primitive dreadlocks. Her skin had darkened from constant exposure, and her once soft features had grown angular from the harsh diet of her mountain existence. That first snowfall triggered a new phase in Sarah's survival journey. The cave became her primary domain, with excursions outside limited to gathering firewood, checking snares, and collecting water. The thin mountain air grew increasingly frigid, and nighttime temperatures plummeted below freezing. Fire became precious, both companion and lifeline. Sarah had learned to start flames using flint stones struck against her knife blade, catching the sparks on dried pine needles and carefully nursing them to life with her breath. She kept a small fire burning whenever possible, though she rationed her wood supply carefully, understanding that winter in the mountains was only beginning. Game grew scarcer as winter tightened its grip, but Sarah's snaring skills had improved dramatically through desperate practice. She set traps along game trails she had identified during warmer months, checking them daily with diminishing expectations but occasional success. One particularly harsh morning in late October, Sarah awoke to find 6 inches of fresh snow blanketing the mountainside. The world outside her cave had transformed overnight into a crystalline landscape of white. The beauty momentarily stole her breath, but practical concerns quickly reasserted themselves. Snow meant increased difficulty in finding food and tracking game, but it also offered one unexpected advantage. She could melt it for water without needing to venture to distant springs. Sarah was scraping snow into her tin cup near the cave entrance when she heard it, the distinctive sound of a twig snapping under weight, too heavy to be a small animal. She froze, cup clutched in her frost-reddened fingers, ears straining. Another sound followed, the soft crunch of footsteps in snow. Someone was approaching her cave. Sarah retreated silently into the shadows of her sanctuary, knife drawn, heart hammering against her ribs. The cave entrance was well concealed, but the fresh tracks in the snow leading directly to it betrayed her presence. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, trying to remember if she had fully extinguished her morning fire. A thin wisp of smoke might have given away her position. Footsteps stopped just outside the cave. Sarah held her breath, knife trembling in her small hand. Then a shadow fell across the narrow entrance as someone crouched to peer inside. The figure that filled the cave opening wasn't wearing a cavalry uniform or settler's clothing. Instead, he wore buckskins and fur, with long black hair falling in braids past his shoulders. The Sioux hunter known as Running Fox had finally found what he had been tracking for days, but it wasn't the game he had expected. Running Fox had first noticed unusual signs in the mountains 5 days earlier. Small footprints too deliberate to be an animal's. A deadfall trap constructed with strips of fabric unlike anything his people would use. Most telling, a tuft of blonde hair caught on a thorn bush, hair unlike any forest creature. Curiosity had turned to disbelief as he followed the subtle trail. A child alone in these mountains? It seemed impossible. Yet each discovery reinforced his suspicion. A tiny handprint preserved in mud near a spring, distinctive knife marks on a pine where someone small had harvested pitch. The remains of small fires, carefully constructed but unmistakably made by human hands. Running Fox knew about the wagon train massacre at Blackfoot Pass. News traveled quickly between tribes, even those like his who had not participated in the attack. The Lakota bands to the east viewed the Blackfoot Pass raid as foolish, an unnecessary provocation that would bring cavalry retaliation. Running Fox shared this view, having seen enough conflict between his people and the white settlers to last many lifetimes. When he realized a child might have survived the massacre, something shifted in his perception of his hunt. No longer was he merely tracking game for his village's pots. He was following the desperate trail of a survival so unlikely, so tenacious, that it commanded his respect. The traditional enmity between his people and the whites became secondary to the unfolding story written in the mountain's subtle signs. This child, this impossible survivor, deserved to be found, if only to honor such extraordinary courage. The tracks in fresh snow made the final approach simple. Running Fox knew he had found the child's den before he even crouched to peer inside. What he didn't expect was the knife-wielding, wild-haired creature who glared back at him from the shadows, more feral wildcat than human child. For a long moment, hunter and hunted regarded each other in tense silence. Running Fox made no move to enter the cave, and Sarah made no move to flee deeper into her sanctuary. They were at an impasse, separated by language, culture, and the bloody history that had claimed Sarah's family. Running Fox slowly raised his empty palms, showing he held no weapons. "How wakanyeja," he said softly. "Greetings, child." Sarah didn't understand his words, but she recognized the gentle tone. Still, she maintained her defensive position, knife extended. "Go away," she said, her voice cracked from disuse. "Please, go away." Running Fox remained motionless, considering his next move carefully. The child was clearly terrified, but also in dire circumstances. The approaching winter would be fatal for her without intervention. Yet forcing his help upon her would only deepen her trauma. With deliberate slowness, Running Fox reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a strip of dried buffalo meat. He placed it on the snow just inside the cave entrance, then backed. Away several paces, crouching down to appear less threatening. Sarah eyed the meat, hunger warring with suspicion. She hadn't tasted proper meat in weeks, her snares yielding increasingly meager results as winter set in. The offering was tempting, perhaps dangerously so. Running Fox watched her internal struggle with compassionate eyes. He knew better than to rush this fragile moment. The child before him had survived against impossible odds. She would make her own decision about whether to accept his help. And so they remained, the Sioux hunter sitting patiently in the snow and the settler child crouched in her cave, as the October sun climbed higher in the cold blue sky, illuminating a most unlikely encounter between two worlds that had been torn apart by violence but might yet be bridged by compassion. Miles away at Fort Laramie, Lieutenant Cooper was reviewing his reports when a scout burst into his office without knocking. "Sir," the man said breathlessly, "traders just came in from the north. They've got news about the Blackfoot Pass massacre." Cooper looked up sharply. "What news?" "There's talk among the peaceful Sioux bands. One of their hunters found something. In the mountains. Or someone. Sir, they're saying a child survived." Cooper immediately stood, knocking his chair backward. "Saddle my horse," he ordered, "and assemble a patrol. We ride within the hour." The search for Sarah Thornton, presumed dead for nearly 3 months, was about to begin anew. Trust came in small increments between Sarah Thornton and Running Fox. The dried buffalo meat remained untouched for hours while she studied the Sioux. Hunter from the shadows of her cave, he made no attempt to enter her sanctuary or force his assistance upon her. Instead, he built a small fire several yards from the entrance, its warmth and light a silent invitation. As dusk approached and the mountain cold intensified, hunger finally overcame Sarah's fear. With the knife still clutched in her hand, she darted forward, snatched the meat, and retreated into the depths of her cave. Running Fox acknowledged this small victory with only a slight nod, his expression remaining calm and unthreatening. The meat was unlike anything Sarah had tasted during her months of survival, rich, smoky, and substantial. She chewed it slowly, savoring each morsel while watching her unexpected visitor through narrowed eyes. Running Fox had witnessed enough of the child's living conditions to understand the precariousness of her situation. The cave provided basic shelter, but her food stores were dangerously inadequate for the coming winter. Her clothing, a tattered dress supplemented with crude animal skin patches, offered insufficient protection against the mountain cold. Without intervention, the child who had defied death for months would likely succumb before spring. As darkness settled over the mountainside, Running Fox made a deliberate decision. He gathered more firewood, building up the flames to create a beacon of warmth in the growing gloom. From his pack, he withdrew a small bundle wrapped in soft-tanned deerskin and placed it near the cave entrance, far enough that Sarah wouldn't feel threatened, close enough that she could retrieve it if she chose. "For you, Wakanyeja," he said, softly, then returned to his position by the fire. Curiosity eventually drew Sarah forward. The bundle contained a rabbit fur blanket, small but infinitely warmer than her threadbare coverings. She touched it hesitantly, then pulled it into the cave, wrapping it around her shoulders with a small sigh of relief. That night, Sarah slept better than she had in months, warmed by both the blanket and the knowledge that someone was keeping watch outside. Running Fox maintained the fire throughout the night, his presence a deterrent to the mountain predators that had been a constant threat during her solitary ordeal. Morning brought another offering, a wooden bowl of steaming stew made from dried meat, wild onions, and roots that Running Fox had gathered at dawn. He placed it where the blanket had been, and again retreated to give her space. The pattern continued for 3 days. Running Fox would leave food, small comforts, or useful items near the cave entrance, then withdraw to maintain his respectful distance. He spoke occasionally in his native tongue, not expecting comprehension, but allowing Sarah to grow accustomed to his voice. He never entered her cave or made any move to touch her. Gradually, Sarah began to emerge for longer periods. At first, she would only dart out to retrieve whatever gift Running Fox had left. Later, she would sit just inside the entrance, visible but protected. By the third evening, she had moved far enough into the open that the firelight illuminated her face, revealing the profound changes wrought by her ordeal. Running Fox saw a child transformed by wilderness and trauma. Her once plump cheeks had hollowed, making her blue eyes seem unnaturally large in her thin face. Her blonde hair hung in wild tangles, sections of it matted beyond repair. Most telling was her watchful stillness, the hypervigilance of one who has learned that survival depends on constant awareness. On the fourth morning, a snowstorm swept across the mountain, bringing biting winds and horizontal snow that made visibility near zero. Running Fox quickly gathered abundant firewood before the worst hit, then faced a critical decision. His temporary camp offered insufficient protection against such weather. The only adequate shelter was Sarah's cave, but entering her sanctuary, uninvited, might shatter the fragile trust he'd built. Sarah solved his dilemma herself. As the storm intensified, she emerged from the cave entrance and for the first time spoke directly to him. "You can come inside," she said, her voice small but clear, "before you freeze." The gesture represented extraordinary courage on her part, inviting the unknown, the other, into her only safe place. Running Fox understood the significance and responded with appropriate solemnity, bowing slightly before gathering his minimal belongings and following her into the narrow opening. Inside, the cave was more spacious than it appeared from the entrance. Sarah had created a surprisingly organized living space. Pine boughs formed a sleeping pallet in the rear, while small niches in the rock walls served as storage for her meager possessions and food stores. A ring of stones near the entrance contained a small fire pit, with the natural chimney above, it drawing smoke outside. Running Fox settled near the entrance, maintaining as much distance as the confined space allowed. He placed his hunting knife on the ground beside him, then deliberately pushed it toward the center of the cave, a gesture of vulnerability and trust. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah picked up the knife and examined it. The blade was superior. To her own dull instrument, the handle adorned with intricate carvings. She ran her finger along the edge, testing its sharpness, then carefully placed it on a rock ledge, accessible to both of them, claimed by neither. The symbolism wasn't lost on Running Fox, who acknowledged the diplomatic compromise with a slight smile. The howling storm created an unexpected opportunity for communication. Confined together but separated by language, Sarah and Running Fox began developing their own means of understanding. He drew pictures in the dirt floor with a stick, simple representations of animals, plants, and people. She pointed to objects and spoke their English names, which he repeated with careful attention to pronunciation. By nightfall, they had established a rudimentary vocabulary spanning their different worlds. Running Fox could say fire, water, and rabbit in English. Sarah had learned their Lakota equivalents, Peter, Minnie, and Mastinkala. More importantly, they had begun using each other's names. Sarah, she had said, pointing to herself. Running Fox, he had responded, tapping his chest. That evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew cooked over the cave's fire, Sarah spoke her first full sentence to her unlikely guardian. "Why did you help me, Running Fox?" He considered the question carefully, aware of its many layers. How could he explain to a child who had witnessed her family's slaughter that not all indigenous people were enemies? How could he convey the complex political divisions between tribes, some of whom opposed attacks on settlers? How could he articulate the simple human compassion that had moved him when he realized a child was alone in the wilderness? Running Fox pointed to the fire between them. "Fire good," he said in his limited English. "Fire warm, but fire also burn." He gestured toward the cave entrance, where the storm continued unabated. Storm strong, storm kill, but storm also bring water, make plants grow. He looked directly at Sarah. "My people, your people, like fire, like storm, can warm, can harm." He touched his chest. Running Fox chooses warm, not harm. See child alone, choose help. The simple explanation, constrained by language barriers but delivered with evident sincerity, seemed to satisfy Sarah. She nodded solemnly, then offered him more stew, a small but significant gesture of acceptance. That night, for the first time since the massacre, Sarah slept in the presence of another human being without fear. The storm raged outside, but within the cave, an unlikely peace had been established. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Cooper's patrol struggled against the same blizzard. Forced to seek shelter in a canyon 15 miles south of Sarah's location, the unexpected storm had caught them midway through their journey north, slowing their progress to a crawl and eventually halting it entirely. "This is the worst possible timing," Cooper fumed as his men established a hasty camp beneath an overhanging cliff. "Every hour we delay," Sergeant Taylor, ever practical, interrupted his commander's frustration. "Sir, we can't help the girl if we freeze to death trying to reach her. The traders said she's with one of the peaceful Sioux. She's safer now than she's been in months." Cooper nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the logic while still chafing at the delay. "First light tomorrow, weather permitting, we ride. I want that child back with her own kind as soon as possible." The storm lasted 2 days, blanketing the mountains in 3 feet of fresh snow and transforming the landscape. When it finally cleared, a brilliant winter sun revealed a pristine white world under crisp blue skies. For Sarah, the storm's passing brought both beauty and an unexpected dilemma. During their confinement, she had grown increasingly comfortable with Running Fox's presence. His gentle manner and evident concern for her welfare had begun healing wounds deeper than the physical privations she had endured. For the first time since the massacre, she felt truly safe. Yet Running Fox recognized that their temporary sanctuary couldn't become permanent. The child needed medical attention, proper nourishment, and ultimately, a return to her own society. His responsibility now was to ensure her safe passage to the nearest settlement or military outpost where she could receive appropriate care. The morning after the storm, Running Fox explained his plan through their developing system of communication. They would travel together to Fort Laramie, where Sarah could be placed with her own people. He would fashion a proper sled from pine branches to transport her through the deep snow, making the journey as comfortable as possible. Sarah received this proposal with mixed emotions. The prospect of returning to civilization, of sleeping in a real bed and eating regular meals, held undeniable appeal. Yet it also meant leaving the only place where she had exercised control since the massacre, abandoning the hard-won sanctuary she had created for herself. Most confusing was the realization that she would be separated from Running Fox, the unlikely protector who had become her sole human connection. "You come too?" she asked, her face betraying her anxiety. Running Fox understood her concern, but couldn't offer false reassurance. Relations between his people and the U.S. military remained tense, even for bands like his that maintained peaceful interactions. Arriving at a fort with a white child would be fraught with risk regardless of his benevolent intentions. "I bring you close," he explained carefully. "Then you go alone last part, safer." He drew a circle in the dirt representing the fort, then traced 2 paths leading to it. One with 2 stick figures traveling together, then diverging with only the smaller figure completing the journey. Sarah frowned at the drawing, clearly displeased with this arrangement. "No," she said firmly, erasing his lines with her palm. "Together." She redrew the path with both figures reaching the fort. Running Fox couldn't help but smile at her stubborn insistence, so characteristic of the determination that had kept her alive for months against impossible odds. But his responsibility now included protecting her from potential misunderstandings that could turn violent. The sight of a Sioux warrior approaching a military fort with a white child would likely be met with gunfire before explanations could be offered. "We see," he compromised, unwilling to upset her with the harsh realities they might face. "First, make ready." The preparations for their journey occupied the remainder of the day. Running Fox constructed a sturdy travois from pine branches and rawhide strips from his pack, creating a sled-like conveyance that could be pulled through deep snow. Sarah gathered her few precious possessions, her mother's Bible, the knife and the tin cup that had sustained her through months of solitude. As sunset approached, Running Fox noticed Sarah standing at the cave entrance, gazing back into the space that had sheltered her through unimaginable circumstances. Her expression held a maturity far beyond her 8 years, a recognition that she was closing a chapter of her life that, however harsh, had formed her into someone new. "You strong," Running Fox said simply, standing beside her. "Always remember." Sarah nodded, understanding his meaning despite the language barrier. She had survived when all odds were against her. That knowledge would remain, regardless of what lay ahead. They departed at dawn the following day. Running Fox pulled the travois with Sarah seated upon it, their progress slow but steady through the deep snow. He chose a route that followed natural contours of the landscape, avoiding steep slopes where possible, and taking advantage of areas where wind had thinned the snowpack. From her position on the travois, Sarah watched the winter wilderness pass by with mixed emotions. For months, the mountains had been both her prison and her sanctuary. Now each step took her farther from the independence she had forged and closer to an uncertain future among her own kind. People who could never truly understand what she had endured. By midday, they had descended to a lower elevation where the snow was less deep and travel became easier. Running Fox maintained a vigilant watch, aware that they were entering territory more frequently patrolled by cavalry. He had wrapped Sarah in his spare buffalo robe, ensuring she remained warm despite the biting wind that swept across the exposed slopes. Their first indication that others were nearby came in mid-afternoon, when Running Fox froze suddenly, head tilted to catch a distant sound. Sarah immediately tensed, recognizing his posture as one of alert caution. "What?" she whispered. "Horses," he replied softly. "Many horses." Within moments, the rhythmic pounding of multiple hooves became audible, even to Sarah's ears. Running Fox quickly assessed their situation. They were exposed on an open hillside with minimal cover available. If the approaching riders were hostile, whether cavalry viewing him as a threat or warriors from a band opposed to his people, their position was vulnerable. Making a swift decision, Running Fox pulled the travois toward a stand of juniper bushes, at the base of a rocky outcropping. It offered meager concealment, but was the best option available. He positioned Sarah behind the largest bush, then stepped away from her, moving into plain sight on the hillside. "Stay," he instructed firmly. "I draw eyes from you." Sarah understood his strategy with clarity born of survival instinct. By making himself visible while she remained hidden, he was ensuring that any potential threat would focus on him rather than discovering her presence. It was a selfless act that placed him at considerable risk. "No," she protested, attempting to follow him. Together, Running Fox gently but firmly guided her back to cover. "Trust," he said, meeting her eyes. "I protect." Before Sarah could argue further, the riders appeared over the ridge above them, 8 cavalry troopers led by Lieutenant Cooper himself. They reined to an abrupt halt at the sight of the lone Sioux standing on the open hillside. Cooper immediately raised his hand, signaling his men to hold their fire, though several had already raised their carbines instinctively. His experienced eye noted several significant details. The man wore the distinctive marks of a Hunkpapa Sioux, not the Blackfoot tribe responsible for the Wagon Train Massacre. He carried no visible weapons, despite obviously noting their approach. And most tellingly, he had made no attempt to flee upon seeing a cavalry patrol. "Hold positions," Cooper ordered his men, then urged his horse forward at a walk, stopping 30 yards from Running Fox. His hand remained near his holstered pistol, but his posture conveyed cautious neutrality rather than immediate threat. "I am Lieutenant William Cooper, United States Cavalry," he announced clearly. "Do you speak English?" Running Fox straightened to his full height, maintaining direct eye contact with the officer. "Some words," he responded. "I'm Running Fox, Hunkpapa." "Hunter." Cooper nodded, maintaining his measured approach. "We've had reports of a white child found in these mountains, a survivor from the Blackfoot Pass massacre. Do you know anything about this?" Running Fox considered his response carefully. The moment was fragile. One misstep could lead to bloodshed. Yet the cavalry's presence also offered the resolution he had been seeking for Sarah's situation. "Child safe," he said simply, then turned slightly toward the juniper bushes. "Sarah, come." For a long moment, nothing happened. Cooper's hand tightened on his reins, suspecting a potential ambush. His men shifted nervously, carbines at ready positions. Then the branches moved and a small figure emerged, a girl so transformed by her ordeal that she barely resembled a white settler's child. Her buckskin-patched dress, wind-burned face, and wild hair spoke of months in the wilderness. Only her striking blue eyes, now regarding the cavalry patrol with obvious suspicion, hinted at her origins. "Sarah Thornton?" Cooper asked gently, dismounting and taking a single step forward. The girl didn't respond to him. Instead, she moved to stand beside Running Fox, her thin hand slipping into his with evident trust. The incongruous image, a white child choosing the protection of a Sioux hunter over approaching men of her own race, struck Cooper with unexpected force. Sergeant Taylor had also dismounted and now stood beside his commanding officer. "Sir," he said quietly, "the traders were right. She survived all this time." Cooper nodded, momentarily speechless at the implications of what they were witnessing. The girl's condition suggested months of wilderness survival, an almost impossible feat for an adult, let alone a child. Yet here she stood, alive against all odds, and clearly bonded with the Sioux hunter who had found her. The lieutenant removed his hat, crouching down to appear less intimidating. "Sarah," he said gently, "we've been looking for you. We want to take you somewhere safe, where you can have warm food and a proper bed. Would you like that?" Sarah looked up at Running Fox, clearly seeking his guidance rather than trusting the stranger's words. The hunter nodded encouragingly, though his expression remained solemn. "They help," he assured her. "Make well." Sarah turned back to Cooper, her young face showing wisdom far beyond her years. "Running Fox comes too," she stated firmly, her first. words to another human being besides her Sioux protector in over 3 months. Cooper hesitated, understanding the complexities of bringing a Sioux warrior to Fort Laramie, even under these exceptional circumstances. Yet he also recognized the profound bond between the child and her rescuer, a connection that might prove crucial to her psychological recovery. "He will be welcomed as an honored guest," Cooper promised, making a decision that would later prove controversial among some of his fellow officers, but which he would never regret. "You have my word as an officer." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, a solemn gesture that seemed to convey both acceptance and a maturity no child her age should possess. She maintained her grip on Running Fox's hand as she finally stepped forward to meet her own kind. As Sergeant Taylor wrapped a cavalry blanket around her thin shoulders, Sarah looked back at the mountains that had been her proving ground. The wilderness had nearly claimed her life, yet it had also revealed her strength. Whatever awaited her at Fort Laramie and beyond, she would face it with the resilience forged during those desperate months alone. And she would not face it without the friend who had followed her impossible trail and offered compassion where others might have seen only an enemy. The journey to Fort Laramie took 4 days through difficult winter terrain. Lieutenant Cooper had brought an extra mount that Sarah could have ridden, but the child refused to be separated from Running Fox. Instead, the Sioux hunter fashioned a more elaborate travois that could be pulled by one of the cavalry horses, allowing Sarah to ride comfortably while he walked alongside. The arrangement created an unusual traveling formation, cavalry troopers in front and rear, with Running Fox and Sarah in the protected center. Cooper observed their interaction with growing fascination. Despite their profoundly different backgrounds and the language barrier between them, the pair had developed a communication system combining broken English, Lakota words, and expressive gestures that seemed remarkably effective. More striking was the evident trust between them. Sarah, who by all rights should have been terrified of indigenous people after witnessing the massacre of her family, showed complete confidence in Running Fox's presence. She ate only food that he approved, followed his guidance without question, and became visibly anxious whenever he moved too far from her side. During evening camps, Sarah insisted on sleeping near Running Fox rather than joining the soldiers by their separate fire. Cooper allowed this arrangement, recognizing that forcing conventional boundaries might cause the already traumatized child additional distress. Instead, he used the opportunity to learn more about the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. "Ask how he found her," Cooper instructed Sergeant Taylor, who had some knowledge of the Lakota language from previous diplomatic engagements. Through Taylor's halting translations, Running Fox explained his discovery of unusual signs in the mountains, small footprints, improvised traps, and other evidence that had led him to Sarah's hidden cave. The Sioux hunter described his amazement at finding a child who had survived alone for months in conditions that would have killed most adults. "He says she is Wakan, sacred or special," Taylor translated. "He believes the spirits protected her because she has an important purpose to fulfill." Cooper nodded thoughtfully. "Ask him why he helped her. His people and hers are enemies by most accounts." Running Fox's response was direct, delivered with dignity that required little translation. "Child not enemy," he said in his limited English. "Child innocent. Helping defenseless ones brings honor." This simple moral clarity impressed Cooper, challenging his preconceptions about the Sioux. Here was evidence that compassion could transcend the bitter divisions between their peoples, proof that humanity's better nature might still prevail in the midst of escalating conflicts. On the 4th day, the walls of Fort Laramie appeared on the horizon, a welcome sight to the weary travelers. As they approached the garrison, Cooper called the party to a halt and addressed Running Fox directly. "I promised you safe entry, and I'll honor that promise," he said, with Taylor translating to ensure complete understanding. "But I must warn you, some at the fort may not welcome your presence. Stay close to me and remember that not everyone understands what you've done for this child." Running Fox acknowledged this warning with a solemn nod. He had anticipated the reception he might receive and had accepted the risk when agreeing to accompany Sarah. Cooper dispatched Taylor ahead to alert the fort of their unusual party, hoping to prevent any unfortunate reactions to the unexpected sight of a Sioux warrior approaching the gates. When they resumed their journey, Cooper positioned himself and his sergeant on either side of Running Fox, a protective escort that symbolized the hunter's status as an honored guest rather than a prisoner or threat. Sarah watched these arrangements with the hyper-awareness that had become second nature during her months of survival. Though only 8 years old, her experiences had honed her ability to read situations and anticipate danger. She sensed the soldiers' uneasiness as they neared the fort and instinctively moved closer to Running Fox. "It's all right," Cooper assured her, noting her apprehension. "You're safe now, Sarah. Both of you are under my protection." The fort gate stood open as they approached, with a small reception committee waiting in the yard. The post commander, Major Wilson, the fort physician, Dr. Abernathy, and Mrs. Hollister, the quartermaster's wife, who had volunteered to care for the child upon her arrival. Cooper dismounted and saluted his superior officer. "Major Wilson, I present Sarah Thornton, sole survivor of the Blackfoot Pass massacre, and Running Fox of the Hunkpapa Sioux, who found and protected her." Wilson's gaze moved from the ragged child to the Sioux hunter, his expression difficult to read. A veteran of numerous Indian campaigns, the Major had lost men to Sioux bullets in previous engagements. Yet protocol demanded he acknowledge Cooper's successful mission. "Well done, Lieutenant," he said formally, then turned to Sarah. "Miss Thornton, you are welcome at Fort Laramie. Mrs. Hollister will see to your immediate needs." Mrs. Hollister stepped forward, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, who had mothered many a lonely soldier during her years at frontier posts. "You poor dear," she said softly. "Let's get you inside where it's warm. A hot bath and clean clothes will make you feel much better." She reached for Sarah's hand, but the child shrank back, pressing against Running Fox's side. After months of solitude followed by days of cautious trust-building with the Sioux hunter, Sarah found this bustling reception overwhelming. The fort's wooden walls felt confining after the open mountains, and the numerous unfamiliar faces triggered her defensive instincts. "No!" she said firmly, gripping Running Fox's buckskin sleeve. "Stay with him." An awkward silence fell over the gathering. Wilson's expression darkened, and several soldiers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The idea of a white child preferring the company of a Sioux warrior over her own kind challenged their fundamental assumptions about the natural order of their world. Dr. Abernathy, a pragmatic man who had treated patients of all backgrounds during his frontier career, broke the impasse. "The child has experienced severe trauma," he observed quietly. "Forcing separation from the one person she currently trusts would cause additional psychological distress. I recommend we proceed with caution." Major Wilson frowned, but deferred to the medical opinion. "Very well. Mrs. Hollister, please arrange appropriate accommodations. Lieutenant Cooper, your Sioux guest is your responsibility. He is not to move about the fort unescorted." Cooper saluted. "Understood, sir." Mrs. Hollister, adapting quickly to the unusual circumstances, addressed Running Fox directly. "Sir, would you be kind enough to help convince young Sarah that she's safe with me? I promise to take good care of her." Running Fox, recognizing the woman's genuine concern, knelt beside Sarah. "These people help," he told her gently. "Make clean, give food, I stay near." "Promise?" Sarah demanded, her voice barely audible. "Promise," he confirmed, then rose and nodded to Mrs. Hollister, who led them both toward the quarters that would become Sarah's first proper shelter in months. The arrangements proved challenging, given the fort's typical segregation practices. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Sarah would stay in Mrs. Hollister's guest room, while Running Fox would occupy an anteroom normally used for storage. It wasn't ideal, but it maintained proximity while observing minimal propriety. Sarah's first bath in nearly 4 months revealed the full extent of her physical transformation. Mrs. Hollister gasped softly at the sight of the child's emaciated frame, covered with half-healed scratches, scars, and bruises from her wilderness ordeal. Her once blonde hair, when finally untangled, had to be cut short in several places where pine sap had created impossible knots. Throughout this process, Sarah remained mostly silent, enduring the ministrations with stoic patience learned from months of hardship. She accepted clean clothes, a simple dress borrowed from the quartermaster's 10-year-old daughter that hung loosely on her diminished frame, and ate the offered stew with careful restraint, having learned that gorging after prolonged hunger led to painful consequences. Dr. Abernathy's examination the following morning confirmed what was visibly apparent. Sarah had survived against extraordinary odds, but at considerable physical cost. Malnutrition had left her weakened, with vitamin deficiencies that would require careful dietary correction. Several improperly healed minor injuries would leave permanent scars. Most concerning to the physician was her emotional state, the unnatural composure that masked what must be profound psychological trauma. "The child shows remarkable resilience," he reported to Major Wilson, "but we shouldn't mistake her composure for recovery. She's experienced horrors no child should endure and survived in conditions that would challenge the most seasoned mountain men. The long-term effects remain to be seen." Wilson nodded grimly. "And what of her attachment to the Sioux? A natural psychological response," Abernathy explained. "He represents safety after months of danger. Forcing separation now would likely trigger severe distress. I recommend a gradual transition as she builds trust with others at the fort." While discussions about Sarah's future continued among the fort's authorities, Running Fox found himself in an unexpected position. Rather than being treated as a reluctantly tolerated visitor, several officers sought him out, curious about the child's remarkable survival and his role in her rescue. Lieutenant Cooper, in particular, spent hours documenting the full account, recognizing its historical significance. Through Sergeant Taylor's increasingly fluid translations, Running Fox described finding Sarah's tracks in the mountains, following her trail of survival, and eventually earning her trust. "She show more courage than many warriors," he stated with evident respect. "Small body, strong spirit." News of Sarah's rescue spread quickly beyond Fort Laramie. A passing journalist named James Wilkins, visiting the fort to gather material for Eastern newspapers, recognized the story's dramatic appeal. His initial dispatch, sent east via military courier, appeared in the Chicago Tribune under the headline, "Miracle Child Survives Massacre, Months Alone in Wilderness." Wilkins' article, somewhat sensationalized but essentially accurate, sparked national interest. Follow-up pieces appeared in newspapers across the country, each embellishing the tale slightly while maintaining its core elements. The wagon train massacre, the child's extraordinary survival, and her rescue by a compassionate Sioux hunter who defied tribal animosities to save her. This publicity created new complications. Letters began arriving at Fort Laramie, including inquiries from distant Thornton relatives in Pennsylvania offering to take the orphaned child. Charitable organizations proposed various arrangements for her care and education. A wealthy businessman in Boston even offered to adopt Sarah, impressed by her demonstration of American fortitude and pioneer spirit. Major Wilson viewed these developments with relief, seeing opportunities to resolve the increasingly awkward situation at his fort. "The child clearly has promising options," he told Cooper. Once she's stronger, we'll arrange transport east with the next suitable escort." Cooper nodded, though he wondered how Sarah herself might view these plans. Since her arrival at the fort, she had gradually expanded her circle of trust to include Mrs. Hollister and Dr. Abernathy, but she still relied heavily on Running Fox's reassuring presence. Her attachment to the Sioux hunter remained strong, creating a lingering discomfort among some at the fort who found the relationship inappropriate despite its innocent nature. The question of Running Fox's departure also required resolution. He had fulfilled his self-appointed mission by bringing Sarah safely to her people, and his prolonged presence at a military installation was becoming politically complicated. Yet he showed no inclination to leave, while Sarah still clung to him for security. 2 weeks after their arrival, Cooper approached Running Fox privately. "Your people must wonder about your extended absence," he suggested carefully. "And spring will soon bring new tensions between our peoples. It might be wise for you to return to your band before the passes become busy with travelers." Running Fox considered these words thoughtfully. "Child still needs," he said simply. "She's safer here now," Cooper assured him, "and her future lies with her own kind. Surely you understand this." The Sioux hunter remained silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded once. "We'll tell her tomorrow. Prepare her heart." That evening, Running Fox requested permission to take Sarah for a short walk along the fort's eastern wall, where they could see the distant mountains that had been her home during those desperate months. Cooper accompanied them, but maintained a respectful distance, allowing them privacy for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. Sarah, looking somewhat healthier after 2 weeks of regular meals and proper shelter, walked beside Running Fox with the easy familiarity they had developed. In her hand, she clutched a small carved wooden fox he had made for her, a keepsake to remember him by. Using their blend of broken English, Lakota words and gestures, Running Fox explained that he would soon return to his people. The news hit Sarah with visible force. She stopped walking abruptly, her face paling beneath its windburn. "You promised," she said, voice trembling. "You promised to stay." Running Fox knelt to meet her eyes. "I stay until you are safe," he reminded her gently. "Now you are safe. Have a warm place, food, medicine. People come soon, take you to your new home." Sarah shook her head vehemently. "No, I go with you." The Sioux hunter sighed, touching her shoulder gently. "Not possible, Wakanyeja. My world not for you. Your world not for me." "I don't have a world anymore," Sarah whispered, giving voice to the profound displacement she felt. Neither the mountains of her ordeal nor the fort of her rescue felt like home. Her family was gone, and the future others planned for her, among distant relatives or adoptive families, seemed as foreign as the stars. Running Fox recognized the depth of her loss, having experienced similar cultural displacement in his own life as the traditional Sioux world collided with advancing white settlement. He searched for words that might bridge the gulf between her past trauma and future possibilities. "You carry your world here," he said finally, touching her chest above her heart. "Family, mountains, even Running Fox, all stay with you, make you strong." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, the first Cooper had seen her shed since her rescue. For months, survival had required emotional containment. Now, safety finally allowed her grief and fear to surface. Running Fox drew her into a gentle embrace, letting her cry against his buckskin shirt while murmuring soothing words in Lakota. Cooper watched this exchange with a tightness in his throat. The bond between this unlikely pair, forged in extreme circumstances and transcending profound cultural differences, spoke to possibilities that seemed increasingly remote in the larger context of frontier relations. Here was humanity at its most fundamental, Compassion overcoming division, connection defying conflict. When Sarah's tears subsided, Running Fox produced a small leather pouch from within his clothing. Opening it carefully, he removed a necklace. A simple leather cord strung with unusual stones, feathers, and a single bear claw. Medicine pouch, he explained, placing it around her neck. Protection. When afraid, hold stones. Remember, mountains make you strong. Remember Running Fox watching over you. Sarah clutched the necklace, recognizing the significance of such a gift. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. The question weighted with understanding beyond her years. Running Fox didn't offer false promises. The future between their peoples remained uncertain, fraught with conflicts rooted in competing claims to the same land. But neither did he extinguish hope entirely. "World turns in circles," he said, gesturing toward the sky where the sun made its daily journey. "Paths that part may cross again." The following morning, Running Fox departed Fort Laramie at dawn. Major Wilson provided him with supplies for his journey north, a gesture of gratitude for his role in Sarah's rescue and an acknowledgement of the unusual bridge he had created between hostile worlds. Sarah stood at the fort gate, watching his figure grow smaller against the horizon. Mrs. Hollister remained beside her, a comforting hand on her shoulder, respecting the child's need to witness this departure rather than shielding her from its pain. "He's a good man," Mrs. Hollister said softly. "Not what I expected from." "From an Indian," Sarah finished, using a child's directness. "He saved me when no one else could find me." Mrs. Hollister nodded, abashed at having her prejudice so simply exposed. "Yes, my dear, you're right." As Running Fox's silhouette finally disappeared from view, Sarah touched the medicine pouch at her neck. The transition ahead would not be easy, adjusting to civilization after months in the wilderness, building new connections after profound loss, reconciling her unique experiences with the conventional expectations that awaited her in Eastern society. But she had survived alone in the mountains when all odds were against her. She had found trust when it seemed impossible. She would find her path forward, carrying with her the strength forged in solitude and the compassion demonstrated by an unlikely guardian. Sarah Thornton turned away from the gate, ready to face whatever came next. The last child of the Blackfoot Pass massacre had a story unlike any other, and it was far from finished. Spring brought change to Fort Laramie and to Sarah Thornton's circumstances. The mountain passes cleared of snow, allowing regular mail deliveries and increasing traffic along the Oregon Trail. Each arrival brought more letters about Sarah, whose story had captured the nation's imagination. Newspaper reporters arrived. Seeking interviews, charitable organizations sent representatives, and distant relatives continued writing with offers to take her in. Sarah observed this commotion with quiet wariness. 3 months at the fort had restored much of her physical health. Her gaunt frame had filled out, vitamin deficiencies had been corrected through Dr. Abernathy's careful dietary regimen, and her cropped hair had begun growing back in soft blonde. Waves. Yet emotional recovery proved more complex than physical healing. Mrs. Hollister, who had become Sarah's primary caretaker, noted the child's continued reticence around strangers. "She speaks when necessary," she reported to Dr. Abernathy during their weekly consultations, "but rarely initiates conversation, and she still wakes with nightmares, terrible ones that leave her shaking for hours." The doctor nodded thoughtfully. Not surprising, given what she witnessed and endured. The mind heals more slowly than the body, especially in cases of profound trauma. "She talks about him, you know," Mrs. Hollister added. "The Sioux, Running Fox. She asks when he might return to visit, though I don't know what to tell her." Abernathy sighed. Probably best not to encourage such expectations. The political situation with the northern tribes grows more tense by the day. I doubt Major Wilson would permit another visit, even if her rescuer sought one. This assessment proved accurate. Relations between settlers and indigenous peoples had deteriorated further that spring, with increased raiding along migration routes and retaliatory actions by military patrols. Fort Laramie stood at the crossroads of these tensions, its garrison strengthened in anticipation of possible conflict. Lieutenant Cooper, who had maintained a special interest in Sarah's welfare, found himself increasingly occupied with reconnaissance, missions and escort duties. Still, he made time to visit her whenever possible, sometimes bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a picture book, or treats from the officers' mess. During one such visit in late April, he found Sarah sitting alone on a bench outside the quartermaster's quarters, watching eastern-bound wagons departing the fort. The medicine pouch Running Fox had given her remained around her neck, its leather cord shortened by Mrs. Hollister so it wouldn't tangle during play. "May I join you, Miss Thornton?" Cooper asked formally, using the playful address that sometimes coaxed a smile from the serious child. Sarah nodded, scooting over to make room. "Are you leading another patrol soon, Lieutenant?" "Tomorrow at dawn," he confirmed, settling beside her. "We're escorting 3 families to Fort Kearney, too dangerous for civilians to travel alone these days." Sarah absorbed this information with the gravity that characterized her responses to all matters involving safety and survival. "Because of Indians?" she asked directly. Cooper hesitated, aware of the complexities this topic presented given her unique experience. "Because of tensions between some tribes and settlers," he clarified carefully. "Not all indigenous people pose threats, as you know better than most." Sarah fingered her medicine pouch thoughtfully. "Running Fox said his people don't attack wagons. He said it brings trouble without honor." "He was right about that," Cooper acknowledged. "Different. Bands have different approaches. The Hunkpapa Sioux generally maintain peace treaties when possible." He paused, then added gently, "Have you given any thought to your own journey east? Major Wilson received a letter yesterday confirming arrangements for your transport to Pennsylvania next month." Sarah's expression remained unchanged, but Cooper noticed her hand tightening around the medicine pouch. "Mrs. Hollister told me," she said simply. "Your mother's sister, your Aunt Rebecca, seems very eager to welcome you into her home. She has daughters near your age, cousins you've never met." Sarah nodded without enthusiasm. "Mrs. Hollister read me her letter." Cooper studied the child's profile, noting the contradiction between her youthful features and the ancient wisdom in her eyes. At 9 years old, she had celebrated a birthday during her time at the fort. Sarah Thornton had experienced more hardship and demonstrated more courage than most adults he knew. Yet decisions about her future remained in others' hands, her own preferences secondary to conventional expectations about proper placement for an orphaned child. "Are you afraid to leave the fort?" he asked directly, respecting her enough to avoid patronizing evasions. Sarah considered the question seriously. "Not afraid," she said finally. "Just..." She struggled to articulate complex emotions with her limited vocabulary. "This isn't my home, but I know it now. Pennsylvania isn't my home either. Nowhere is." The statement carried such profound displacement that Cooper found himself momentarily speechless. Sarah had lost not just her family, but her entire sense of belonging in the world. The wagon train massacre had destroyed her past. Her months of solitary survival had separated her from normal childhood, and now her future would take her to strangers in a place she couldn't remember, having left Pennsylvania when she was only 5. "Home isn't always a place," Cooper offered finally. "Sometimes it's the people who care about you." Sarah absorbed this idea, then asked unexpectedly, "Do you have a home, Lieutenant?" The question caught Cooper off guard. "I was born in Connecticut," he replied after a moment. My parents still live there, but the army has been my home for 12 years now. Do you miss Connecticut? Sometimes, he admitted. But I've found purpose here that I never would have discovered had I stayed. This concept seemed to resonate with Sarah. I found things in the mountains, too, she said quietly, things I wouldn't know otherwise. Cooper nodded, understanding she meant more than mere survival skills. Her ordeal had revealed inner resources and perspectives that permanently distinguished her from other children her age, a premature wisdom gained at terrible cost. Perhaps that's what Running Fox meant, Sarah continued, about carrying my world with me. He sounds like a wise man, Cooper acknowledged, impressed once again by the Sioux hunter's insight. Sarah's solemn expression softened slightly. He told good stories at night in the cave, about stars and animals and how the world began, different from the Bible stories Mama told, but good too. This glimpse into her time with Running Fox, a detail she had not previously shared, suggested growing trust in Cooper. Encouraged, he ventured a question that had long puzzled him. Sarah, how did you survive those first weeks alone, before you found your cave and learned to trap food? She looked down at her hands, now clean and softened compared to the calloused, dirt-encrusted appendages they had been upon her rescue. I remembered things Papa taught the boys, about which plants were safe and how to find water. She paused, then added with simple honesty, and I talked to Mama and Daniel and Matthew, even though they were gone, pretended they could hear me and tell me what to do. Cooper felt a tightness in his throat. I'm sure they would be very proud of how brave you've been. A week later, final arrangements for Sarah's journey east were confirmed. She would travel with a military escort to Fort Kearny, then continue to St. Louis via riverboat in the care of an army chaplain's wife. From there, a rail journey would take her to Pennsylvania, where her Aunt Rebecca would meet her in Philadelphia. The night before her scheduled departure, Sarah slipped away from Mrs. Hollister's quarters after bedtime. The fort's evening routines provided cover for her movement as she made her way to a specific section of the eastern wall, the place where she had last seen Running Fox disappear into the distance. Lieutenant Cooper, completing a final inspection before his own departure, as leader of Sarah's escort, spotted her small figure atop the wall. Rather than immediately calling her down from her unauthorized perch, he approached quietly, curious about her purpose. Sarah sat with her legs dangling over the inner side of the wall, gazing eastward toward the distant mountains now visible, only as dark shapes against the night sky. The medicine pouch was clutched in both hands, and her lips moved silently as if in conversation. Cooper cleared his throat softly to announce his presence, not wanting to startle her. "It's past curfew, Miss Thornton," he said, keeping his tone light rather than accusatory. Sarah turned, unsurprised by his appearance. "I needed to say goodbye," she explained simply. "To the mountains," she nodded, "and to thank them for keeping me alive." Cooper settled beside her, respecting the ritual significance of her act. Many soldiers developed their own private ceremonies before journeys, acknowledging forces beyond their control. Sarah's animistic gesture, thanking the mountains themselves, reflected both her unique experience and perhaps the influence of Running Fox's spiritual teachings. "The mountains are indifferent," he observed gently. "They shelter or kill without preference. Your survival came from your own strength." Sarah considered this perspective. "Running Fox said the mountains have spirits," she countered. "Not like people, but aware. He said they chose to help me because I respected them." Cooper didn't contradict her. After months alone in the wilderness, Sarah had developed a relationship with the natural world that defied conventional Western understanding. Whether viewed through Christian, indigenous, or secular lenses, her survival remained remarkable, a testament to human resilience regardless of how one explained the forces that had preserved her. "Are you ready for tomorrow's journey?" he asked, changing the subject. "Mrs. Hollister packed my bag. Sarah replied, which Cooper noted wasn't actually an answer to his question. "It's a big change," he acknowledged, "but your aunt's letters suggest she'll provide a good home. And Pennsylvania is safer than the frontier." Sarah's expression remained unreadable in the dim light. "Lieutenant Cooper," she said after a moment, "will you promise something, if it's within my power to promise? If Running Fox ever comes to Fort Laramie asking about me, will you tell him I'm safe and that I kept his medicine pouch?" The request revealed her continued attachment to her unlikely rescuer, as well as her awareness that direct communication between them was improbable. Cooper felt a pang of sadness at this evidence of her premature understanding of the world's harsh divisions. "I promise," he said solemnly, "and I'll ensure that officers who come after me know to pass along any message from him to you in Pennsylvania." Sarah nodded, apparently satisfied with this arrangement. "We should go back," she said practically. "Mrs. Hollister will worry if she checks my bed." The next morning dawned clear and mild, ideal conditions for the beginning of the eastward journey. A small convoy had assembled, 2 wagons carrying supplies, and Sarah's military escort of 8 troopers, led by Lieutenant Cooper. Sarah herself would ride in the lead wagon alongside Mrs. Peterson, the quartermaster sergeant's wife, who would accompany her as far as Fort Kearny. The fort's personnel gathered to bid farewell to the child who had briefly become their collective responsibility. Major Wilson made a formal speech about Sarah's courage, presenting her with a specially commissioned medal for extraordinary valor in survival against hostile elements. Dr. Abernathy gave her a small medical kit containing basic remedies for common ailments. Mrs. Hollister, teary-eyed, pressed a handkerchief embroidered with Sarah's initials into her hands. These gestures of recognition and care clearly meant something to Sarah, who accepted each gift with solemn gratitude. Yet Cooper, observing closely, noted the emotional reserve she maintained, a protective distance that had characterized her interactions since arriving at the fort. Only when the actual moment of departure arrived did that reserve briefly crack. As Sarah climbed into the wagon, Mrs. Hollister stepped forward for a final embrace. The child stiffened momentarily, then suddenly returned the hug with unexpected intensity, burying her face against the older woman's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. "For everything." Mrs. Hollister swallowed hard, stroking Sarah's hair. "You write to me, young lady? I want to hear all about your new life in Pennsylvania." Sarah nodded, then composed herself, and settled onto the wagon bench. Cooper gave the order to move out, and the convoy rolled through Fort Laramie's gates into the open prairie beyond. The journey to Fort Kearny followed the established trail along the Platte River, a route well-traveled by emigrants and military patrols. Spring had transformed the landscape, with wildflowers carpeting the prairie and fresh green leaves adorning cottonwoods along the riverbanks. The weather held fair, and they made good progress, covering nearly 20 miles each day. Cooper, riding alongside the lead wagon, observed Sarah's response to this journey that retraced part of her family's original westward route. Unlike most children, who might have grown restless with the monotonous travel, Sarah maintained constant vigilance, her eyes scanning the horizon and landmarks with practiced attention. The survival habits formed during her months alone hadn't faded. She instinctively noted water sources, shelter possibilities, and changes in weather patterns. On the third evening, as they made camp beside a small tributary of the Platte, Cooper found Sarah sitting slightly apart from the others, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant orange and purple hues. "Are you comfortable, Miss Thornton?" he asked, approaching with a tin cup of hot tea for her. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned you've been quiet today." Sarah accepted the tea with a nod of thanks. "I'm fine," she said, then added unexpectedly, "We camped here before. On the way west, Papa caught fish in that pool." Cooper glanced toward the spot she indicated, surprised by this recollection. "You recognize this place?" "I remember all the camps," she said simply. "Mama let me collect flowers at each one. I pressed them in her Bible." A shadow crossed her face. "The Bible burned in the wagon, but I found it after. The flowers were still inside." "Do you still have it?" Cooper asked gently. Sarah nodded. "In my bag. Mrs. Hollister wrapped it in oilcloth to protect it." This tangible connection to her mother clearly held immense importance to Sarah. Cooper made a mental note to ensure the Bible remained safe throughout their journey, particularly during the riverboat portion where water damage posed a risk. "Tomorrow we'll pass the junction where the Oregon Trail branches northwest," Cooper told her. "From there, we'll be on a different route than the one your family took." Sarah absorbed this information with evident relief. The eastbound journey had forced her to confront painful memories associated with specific locations. A new route offered psychological distance from those traumatic associations. As predicted, the following day took them past the trail junction and onto the more heavily traveled eastern route. Traffic increased noticeably, freight wagons hauling goods to western outposts, stagecoaches carrying passengers and mail, and occasional westbound immigrant trains pursuing the same dreams that had animated the Thornton family's journey the Fee. Previous year, these encounters with westward-bound settlers stirred complex emotions in Sarah. Cooper noticed her watching the passing wagons with an expression that mingled sadness, knowledge beyond her years, and something like pity for those innocently pursuing a dream she had seen shattered. Once, when they passed a particularly large wagon train with numerous children playing alongside during a rest stop, Sarah turned to Cooper with unusual directness. "They don't know what's waiting," she said quietly. "Not all journeys end like yours did," he reminded her gently. "Most settlers reach their destinations safely." Sarah nodded, but her expression suggested she carried wisdom too dearly purchased to be easily dismissed. Her perspective on the Western migration had been forever altered by witnessing its darkest possibilities. On the 10th day of travel, Fort Kearney appeared on the horizon, a welcome sight signaling the end of the first phase of Sarah's journey east. The fort was larger and busier than Laramie, serving as a major way station on the overland route and a supply depot for military operations throughout the region. Cooper had sent a rider ahead to announce their imminent arrival, so a proper reception awaited them. Colonel Gardner, the fort commander, greeted them personally, having been briefed on Sarah's remarkable story. His wife had arranged temporary quarters where Sarah and Mrs. Peterson could refresh themselves after the dusty journey. "Lieutenant Cooper," the colonel said after initial pleasantries, "a word in private, if you please." Once they were alone in the colonel's office, Gardner's expression grew serious. "There's been a development regarding the child's situation," he said without preamble. "A telegram arrived yesterday from the War Department." Cooper frowned. "Sir?" "Apparently, Miss Thornton's story has attracted attention in Washington. The Secretary of War himself has taken an interest in her case, viewing it as an opportunity to demonstrate the Army's humanitarian concerns amid increasing criticism of frontier policies." "I'm not sure I understand the implications, sir." Gardner handed him the telegram. "The Secretary requests that Sarah Thornton be brought to Washington before continuing to Pennsylvania. He wishes to present her to President Grant and hold a public ceremony honoring her survival and rescue, with all attendant publicity, of course." Cooper skimmed the document, his concern growing. "Sir, with all due respect, Sarah is a traumatized child, not a political symbol. I'm not convinced that a public exhibition would serve her best interests." "Your concerns are noted, Lieutenant," Gardner replied, his tone suggesting limited patience for objections. "However, these orders come directly from the highest levels. The arrangements have already been made. You will escort Miss Thornton to St. Louis, as planned, but from there you will accompany her to Washington rather than transferring her care to others." Cooper straightened. "Yes, sir," he responded formally, while inwardly questioning the wisdom of subjecting a child who had already endured so much to the additional stress of public scrutiny and political theater. The challenge now would be explaining this change of plans to Sarah herself, a girl whose hard-won trust in adults remained fragile, and whose journey toward healing had only just begun. Sarah took the news of their altered destination with the same stoic composure that had characterized her response to most changes in her life since the massacre. Lieutenant Cooper, watching, her face carefully as he explained the War Department's instructions, detected only a slight tightening of her jaw, a barely perceptible sign of distress beneath her calm exterior. "So we're going to Washington instead of Pennsylvania," she clarified, her voice neutral. "Yes," Cooper confirmed. "At least initially. You'll still go to your aunt's home afterward." Sarah nodded, absorbing this information. "Why does the president want to see me?" The directness of her question highlighted the absurdity of the situation, a traumatized child being summoned like a curiosity to satisfy political agendas. Cooper chose his words carefully, respecting Sarah's intelligence while tempering the harsher realities. "Your story has captured public attention," he explained. "People across the country have read about your courage and survival. The president wishes to recognize your extraordinary experience." Sarah considered this explanation. "Like Major Wilson's medal ceremony?" "Similar, yes, but on a larger scale." Something shifted in Sarah's expression, a wariness that suggested she understood more than Cooper had articulated. "Will there be many people watching?" "Probably," Cooper admitted. "Government officials, newspaper reporters, perhaps some distinguished citizens of Washington." Sarah fell silent, her gaze drifting toward the window of their temporary quarters at Fort Kearny. Outside, soldiers and civilians moved purposefully through the busy compound, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding within. "Lieutenant Cooper," she said finally, still looking outward, "at night in the mountains, I learned to be very still and quiet. Animals would come close, not knowing I was there. Sometimes I would watch deer or foxes for hours without them noticing me." Cooper waited, sensing the metaphorical importance of this seemingly tangential observation. "I don't think I can be still." "Enough in Washington," Sarah continued softly. "Everyone will be watching me, waiting for me to do something. It feels—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Dangerous." The assessment struck Cooper with its perceptive clarity. Sarah's survival instincts, honed through months of solitude and vigilance, were signaling threat in this new development. Not physical danger, but a psychological exposure that contradicted everything she had learned about safety and self-preservation. "I understand," he said gently, "and if it were within my power to change these orders, I would. But perhaps we can establish some protections." An idea formed as he spoke. "What if I request that any public appearances be limited in duration and attendance, and that you not be required to speak unless you wish to?" Sarah turned back to him, her blue eyes serious. "Would they listen to you?" "They might not," Cooper acknowledged honestly, "but I promise to advocate for your comfort throughout our time in Washington, and I'll remain with you during any official functions." This assurance seemed to ease Sarah's tension slightly. Cooper's consistent honesty, never promising what he couldn't deliver, never minimizing challenges she would face, had earned her trust gradually over their months of acquaintance. "Thank you," she said simply, then added with the practical focus that had kept her alive in the wilderness. "When do we leave for St. Louis?" "Tomorrow morning. The riverboat journey will take approximately 6 days, depending on conditions." Sarah nodded, already mentally preparing for this next phase of her journey, a characteristic adaptation that Cooper had come to admire. Despite her youth, Sarah Thornton possessed a remarkable ability to accept circumstances beyond her control and navigate them with determined practicality. The following day brought clear weather and favorable conditions for departure. Cooper's escort had been reduced to 4 troopers for the journey to St. Louis, as the terrain was generally safer and well-traveled. Mrs. Peterson would continue accompanying Sarah, providing female supervision considered proper for a young girl's travels. They departed Fort Kearny in a military ambulance, a covered, spring-suspended wagon that offered more comfort than their previous transportation. The route would take them southeast to the Missouri River, where they would board a steamboat bound for St. Louis. As they left the fort behind, Cooper noticed Sarah's gaze fixed westward toward the distant mountains now invisible beyond the horizon. Her expression held a complexity beyond simple homesickness or regret, something more like acknowledgement of a completed chapter. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, riding alongside the ambulance. Sarah nodded. "Just saying goodbye again," she replied, "to the mountains and—" She hesitated, then added, "and to Running Fox. I think we're too far away now for him to ever find me." The observation carried such poignant resignation that Cooper found himself momentarily speechless. Despite her youth, Sarah understood geographical and cultural distances with unusual clarity, comprehending that each mile eastward diminished the already slim possibility of ever reconnecting with her unlikely savior. "Distance doesn't erase connection," Cooper offered finally. "You carry his teachings with you, just as he carries the memory of helping you." Sarah touched the medicine pouch at her neck, a gesture that had become habitual during moments of stress or transition. "Mrs. Hollister said my aunt might not let me keep this," she confided. "She said proper Eastern families might consider it pagan." Cooper frowned. "Mrs. Hollister sometimes forgets that rules can be flexible. That pouch represents an important part of your journey. I can't imagine anyone who knows its significance would ask you to give it up." This reassurance seemed to satisfy Sarah, who settled back into watching the passing landscape with her characteristic, quiet attentiveness. The journey to the Missouri River took 3 days, following established roads through increasingly settled territories. Unlike the open prairies and rugged foothills they had traversed previously, this route featured farms, small communities, and frequent traffic. Sarah observed these signs of civilization with cautious interest, having spent most of her recent life in wilderness or frontier military outposts. Upon reaching the river town of Nebraska City, they secured passage on the steamboat Occidental, a substantial packet boat that served both passenger and cargo needs along the Missouri. For Sarah, who had never seen a vessel larger than a canoe, the steamboat's imposing presence, 3 decks high with an ornate pilot house and twin smokestacks belching coal smoke, represented yet another threshold into an unfamiliar world. Cooper noticed her apprehension as they approached the gangplank. "It's perfectly safe," he assured her. "These boats make this journey hundreds of times each season." "It's not that," Sarah replied, her gaze fixed on the crowded deck where passengers milled about. "There are so many people." The observation highlighted another challenge in Sarah's adjustment. After months alone in the wilderness, followed by the relatively contained environment of frontier forts, the social density of civilian life represented a significant shock. Cooper made a mental note to secure private cabin space for their journey, minimizing Sarah's exposure to crowds until she could acclimate gradually. The steamboat captain, a veteran riverman named Harlan Wilson, took particular interest in their unusual party once he learned Sarah's identity from Cooper. "The mountain girl," he exclaimed, eyes widening. "Why, half the newspapers in the country have printed your story, young miss. My own wife cried reading about your rescue." Sarah shrunk, visibly from this attention, stepping closer to Cooper's side. "Captain Wilson," Cooper interjected smoothly, "Miss Thornton has had a tiring journey thus far. Might we complete boarding procedures and allow her to rest in her cabin?" The captain, chastened by Sarah's obvious discomfort, quickly arranged for a steward to show them to their accommodations, a small but well-appointed cabin with 2 berths for Sarah and Mrs. Peterson and an adjoining room for Cooper. The 4 troopers would lodge in standard passenger quarters on a lower deck. Once settled, Sarah immediately gravitated toward the cabin window, which provided a view of the bustling wharf as final boarding and loading proceeded. Cooper, preparing to leave her in Mrs. Peterson's care, paused at the door. "We'll depart within the hour," he informed her. "The journey to St. Louis should take approximately 6 days, river conditions permitting." Sarah nodded without turning from the window. "Lieutenant Cooper," she said after a moment, "did you mean what you said at Fort Kearny about staying with me in Washington?" "Of course," he affirmed. "My orders are to escort you throughout your journey, including any official functions in the capital." Sarah seemed to relax slightly at this confirmation. "Thank you," she said simply. The steamboat journey provided an unexpected respite for Sarah. After initial wariness, she discovered that the vessel's rhythmic movements and the hypnotic flow of the river had a calming effect. The private cabin offered sanctuary from the crowds of passengers, while the ever-changing shoreline provided constant visual interest without requiring social engagement. Cooper encouraged her to take brief walks on deck during quieter periods, gradually increasing her comfort with more populated spaces. These excursions revealed Sarah's continuing observational acuity. She quickly identified patterns in river navigation, noting how pilots adjusted their course based on water conditions and channel markers. "You would have made an excellent scout," Cooper remarked, after she correctly predicted a course adjustment before the helmsman executed it. "I just watch," Sarah explained with characteristic simplicity. "Like in the mountains, things show you what they're going to do if you pay attention." This capacity for observation, developed as a survival mechanism during her solitary months, manifested in other ways throughout their journey. Sarah noticed interpersonal dynamics among passengers, identified approaching weather changes before most adults registered them, and maintained constant awareness of exit routes and defensive positions. Unconscious habits formed when her life depended on such vigilance. By their 4th day on the river, Cooper had begun quietly preparing Sarah for what awaited in Washington. Without overwhelming her with details, he explained basic protocols for meeting government officials, outlined likely ceremony procedures, and suggested simple responses she might give if questioned by reporters or dignitaries. "You're not required to describe your experiences in detail," he emphasized. "A simple thank you or I'm grateful to be safe now is entirely sufficient if you feel uncomfortable with more extensive answers." Sarah absorbed these suggestions with solemn attention. "Will they ask about running fox?" she inquired. The question revealed her continuing concern about how her indigenous rescuer would be perceived in official narratives. Cooper considered his response carefully. "They might," he acknowledged. "Some may find it difficult to understand the relationship between you and running fox, given the complex relations between settlers and indigenous peoples. If you wish to speak of him, do so truthfully, but perhaps emphasize his kindness and help, rather than any spiritual teachings he shared." Sarah's expression suggested she understood the unspoken implications, that Eastern audiences might more readily accept practical assistance from a Sioux hunter than cultural or spiritual exchange between them. "I won't pretend he didn't save me," she stated firmly. "Nor should you," Cooper agreed. "His actions were honorable by any standard. Just be prepared that not everyone sees these matters with equal clarity." As they neared St. Louis, river traffic increased dramatically. Steamboats, flatboats, and barges crowded the waterway, while shoreline settlements grew more frequent and substantial. For Sarah, whose recent life had been defined by wilderness isolation and frontier outposts, this progression into denser civilization created visible tension. Cooper noticed her spending more time in the cabin, her excursions to the deck briefer and less frequent. When she did emerge, she kept close to the railing, maximizing physical space between herself and other passengers. These signs of retreat concerned him, given the far more populous environments that awaited in Washington and Philadelphia. On their final evening aboard the Occidental, Cooper invited Sarah to join him for a private dinner in the small officers' mess that Captain Wilson had made available for their use. The setting provided an opportunity for conversation away from Mrs. Peterson's well-intentioned but sometimes constraining presence. Sarah arrived wearing the best dress from her limited wardrobe, a simple blue cotton garment that Mrs. Hollister had altered from donated clothing at Fort Laramie. Her hair, now grown to chin length, had been neatly combed, and the medicine pouch remained visible at her neck. "You look very proper, Miss Thornton," Cooper said formally, pulling out her chair. Sarah acknowledged the compliment with a nod as she sat. "Mrs. Peterson showed me which fork to use for different foods," she confided. "There are many rules in civilized places." The observation carried no judgment, merely the factual assessment that had characterized Sarah's approach to each new environment she encountered. Cooper found himself smiling at her matter-of-fact acceptance of social complexities that many adults found vexing. "Rules can be useful," he suggested, "but they're rarely as important as genuine kindness and honest character, qualities you possess in abundance." Their simple meal progressed with comfortable conversation about the river, journey, and preparations for their arrival in St. Louis the following day. As dessert was served, apple tart with cinnamon, which Sarah particularly enjoyed, Cooper introduced a more serious topic. "I've been thinking about our upcoming time in Washington," he began, "and I want you to know that if at any point you feel overwhelmed by ceremonies or attention, you may signal me and I'll find a way to remove you from the situation." Sarah looked up from her dessert, surprised by this offer. "Even if the president is there?" "Even then," Cooper confirmed. "Your well-being takes precedence over protocol. We can establish a simple signal, perhaps touching your medicine pouch twice in succession, that tells me you need a respite." The suggestion visibly relieved Sarah. Having some measure of control, some established escape mechanism, aligned with the survival strategies that had kept her alive in the wilderness. "Thank you," she said with genuine gratitude. "I'll try to be brave, but sometimes—" She hesitated, seeking words for the overwhelming sensations that occasionally gripped her in crowded or unfamiliar situations. "You don't need to explain," Cooper assured her. "After what you've endured, certain circumstances naturally trigger protective responses. There's no shame in that. It's simply your mind's way of keeping you safe." Sarah nodded, recognizing the truth in his explanation. "Lieutenant Cooper," she said after a moment, "what happens after Washington and Philadelphia, after everyone stops being interested in my story?" The question revealed Sarah's awareness of her temporary celebrity, and her understanding that public attention would eventually fade, leaving her to construct a life beyond her identity as the massacre survivor. Cooper considered his response carefully. "You'll have opportunities that most children never receive," he said finally. "Your aunt's family is comfortably situated. You'll likely receive proper education, perhaps even college someday if you desire it. Your experiences have given you unusual perspective that may lead to unique paths. But I'll always be different," Sarah observed, not as a complaint but as a simple fact. "Yes," Cooper acknowledged, respecting her enough to offer honesty rather than false comfort. "You've lived through extraordinary circumstances that most people can never fully comprehend. But being different isn't necessarily a disadvantage. It can become a source of strength and purpose. Sarah absorbed this perspective, twisting her dessert fork thoughtfully between her fingers. Running Fox said something similar. He said the mountains had marked me as someone walking between worlds. The poetic description seemed profoundly apt. Sarah Thornton indeed stood at the intersection of multiple realities: frontier and civilization, survival and society, childhood and premature wisdom. Her journey forward would require navigating these dualities, finding balance between the wilderness resilience she had developed and the social integration now expected of her. "I believe he was right," Cooper said simply. As they concluded their meal, the Occidental's whistles sounded, signaling approach to a landing for an overnight wood resupply. Sarah rose from her chair with the self-contained composure that continued. To impress Cooper, a child conducting herself with dignity that many adults never achieved. "Tomorrow, St. Louis," she said, neither enthusiastic nor apprehensive, merely acknowledging the next phase of her continuing journey. "Tomorrow, St. Louis," Cooper confirmed, "and then onward to Washington, where a great many people are eager to meet the extraordinary Sarah Thornton." What neither of them could anticipate was that among those awaiting their arrival in the nation's capital was someone with a direct connection to the Blackfoot Pass massacre, a presence that would reopen questions about Sarah's tragedy and challenge. The narrative that had captured the nation's imagination. St. Louis marked Sarah's first encounter with a major American city. The steamboat docked amid bustling commercial activity, stevedores loading cargo, merchants hawking goods, and travelers from across the nation converging at this gateway to the West. For a child whose recent existence had been defined by wilderness, solitude, and frontier outposts, the sensory bombardment proved overwhelming. Lieutenant Cooper noticed Sarah's distress immediately. Her breathing quickened, her posture stiffened, and her hand clutched the medicine pouch at her neck. Without drawing attention to her anxiety, he positioned himself between Sarah and the crowd, creating a protective barrier. "We'll proceed directly to our hotel," he informed her quietly. "A carriage is waiting." Their accommodations had been arranged by the War Department, spacious rooms at the Planters House, St. Louis's finest hotel. Sarah's eyes widened at the ornate lobby with its crystal chandeliers and velvet furnishings, so different from the Spartan quarters she had occupied since the massacre. "This will be our base for 2 days," Cooper explained. "While we await the train to Washington, you can rest and prepare for the journey ahead." That evening, after Sarah had retired to her room with Mrs. Peterson, Cooper received an unexpected visitor, James Wilkins, the journalist whose initial articles had brought Sarah's story to national attention. "Lieutenant Cooper," Wilkins greeted him enthusiastically, "I hope to catch you in St. Louis. The Tribune has assigned me to cover Miss Thornton's Washington reception. Quite the honor the President is bestowing." Cooper regarded the reporter with cautious professionalism. Wilkins had treated Sarah's story with reasonable accuracy and respect in his reporting, avoiding the most sensationalistic elements that other newspapers had emphasized. Still, Cooper remained protective of his young charge. "Mr. Wilkins," he acknowledged, "I trust you understand that Miss Thornton's well-being remains our primary concern. She's still recovering from profound trauma." Wilkins nodded earnestly. Of course. That's actually why I sought you out privately. There's a development you should be aware of before reaching Washington." Cooper's expression sharpened. "What sort of development?" "A man named Ezekiel Hammond has been making waves in congressional circles," Wilkins explained. "Claims to be a survivor of the Blackfoot Pass massacre, says he was scouting ahead of the wagon train when the attack occurred and witnessed it from hiding." "That's impossible," Cooper responded immediately. "We investigated thoroughly. There were no survivors except Sarah." "That's what makes it noteworthy," Wilkins agreed. "Hammond appeared in Washington just after news of Sarah's rescue broke. He's been telling a somewhat different version of events than what's been reported. Claims the attack wasn't unprovoked. Says, the Wagon Master fired first when approached by a peaceful delegation. Cooper's jaw tightened. And people are giving credence to these claims? Some are. Hammond has aligned himself with congressmen who oppose current Indian policies. They're using his account to challenge military actions against tribes in the Wyoming Territory. Wilkins leaned forward. He's requesting a meeting with Sarah when she arrives in Washington. Absolutely not, Cooper stated flatly. The child has endured enough without being subjected to a political confrontation. Wilkins nodded sympathetically. I thought you'd feel that way. Just wanted you to be prepared for what awaits in the capital. This Hammond fellow has complicated what was intended as a simple human interest ceremony. After the journalist departed, Cooper remained troubled by this new information. The emergence of a supposed second survivor raised serious questions. Was Hammond an opportunist exploiting Sarah's tragedy for political purposes, or had there genuinely been another witness to the massacre? Either way, his presence threatened to transform Sarah's Washington visit from a ceremonial honor into a contested political narrative. Cooper decided to withhold this information from Sarah temporarily. She had enough challenges navigating her current circumstances without adding this new complexity. He would address the situation upon reaching Washington, where he could better assess Hammond's claims and intentions. The train journey to the capital proved less stressful for Sarah than the steamboat passage. Their private compartment provided sanctuary from other passengers, and the rhythmic motion of the rails seemed to soothe her. She spent hours watching the landscape transform from the Mississippi Valley through the rolling hills of the Ohio country and into the more densely populated eastern regions. It's so different from the mountains, she observed as they passed yet another tidy farm with cultivated fields stretching to the horizon. Everything shaped by people instead of nature. Different, but not without its own beauty, Cooper suggested. Sarah considered this. The mountains are honest, she said finally. They don't pretend to be something they're not. They can kill you, but they never lie about it. The observation carried wisdom beyond her years, a perspective earned through her extraordinary ordeal. Cooper wondered how this hard-won insight would serve her in Washington's political environment, where pretense often obscured reality. They arrived in the capital on a clear May morning in 1869. A military escort awaited them at the station, an honor guard arranged by the War Department as part of the official reception. Sarah observed the uniformed soldiers with her characteristic quiet assessment, neither impressed by the ceremony nor intimidated by it. Their quarters had been arranged at the Willard Hotel, where a suite of rooms awaited Sarah, Mrs. Peterson, and Lieutenant Cooper. The accommodations reflected the importance the administration placed on Sarah's visit, spacious chambers furnished with every comfort and convenience available in post-war Washington. The presidential reception will take place tomorrow afternoon, Cooper informed Sarah as she explored the sitting room with cautious curiosity. Today is for rest and preparation. A seamstress will arrive shortly to fit you with appropriate attire for the ceremony. Sarah nodded, accepting these arrangements with her usual composure. Only someone who knew her well would notice the tension in her shoulders and the frequency with which her hand moved to the medicine pouch at her neck, subtle signs of her underlying anxiety. That evening, after Sarah had been fitted for a new dress and retired early to prepare for the following day's events, Cooper received a message requesting his presence at the War Department. Secretary Rawlins wished to discuss the Hammond situation before the presidential reception. The meeting confirmed Cooper's worst fears. Hammond had gained significant audience among certain political factions, and his account of the massacre, which differed substantially from both military reports and Sarah's limited descriptions, had become a focal point for critics of frontier policies. "The President wishes to avoid any awkwardness at tomorrow's ceremony," Secretary Rawlins explained. "Hammond has been explicitly excluded from the guest list, but he continues pressing for a meeting with the child. Claims it would bring healing to them both as survivors." "Sir, I must strongly object to subjecting Miss Thornton to such an encounter," Cooper stated firmly, "especially without thorough investigation of Hammond's claims. There were 23 bodies recovered at Blackfoot Pass. Every member of the wagon train was accounted for, except Sarah." "Which raises the question of Hammond's identity," Rawlins acknowledged. "We're investigating, but he's garnered enough political support to make this delicate. For now, maintain close watch over the child during tomorrow's events. We've doubled security to ensure Hammond cannot create a scene." Cooper returned to the hotel, troubled by these developments. His protective instincts toward Sarah had grown beyond professional duty into genuine concern for her welfare. The thought of her being used as a political pawn in debates about frontier policy violated everything he believed about proper treatment of a traumatized child. The presidential reception the following day proceeded with formal dignity. Sarah, dressed in a new blue dress that echoed the color of her eyes, conducted herself with remarkable poise despite the unfamiliar surroundings and protocols. President Grant, known for his military bearing rather than personal warmth, showed unexpected gentleness when addressing the child. "Miss Thornton," he said, kneeling slightly to meet her eye level, "your courage brings honor to this nation. You grown men could have survived what you endured." Sarah met his gaze directly. "Thank you, Mr. President," she responded simply, "but I wasn't alone the whole time. Running Fox helped me when no one else could find me." A slight murmur rippled through the assembled dignitaries at this direct reference to her Sioux rescuer. Cooper, standing nearby, noted the president's thoughtful expression as he absorbed Sarah's unvarnished truth. "Then we owe this Running Fox a debt of gratitude as well," Grant acknowledged, surprising many with his ready acceptance of the indigenous contribution to Sarah's survival. Compassion knows no boundaries of nation or tribe. The official ceremony concluded without incident, Hammond's threatened appearance never materializing. Sarah received a special medal commissioned to honor her survival, a gold disc bearing her name and the inscription "Extraordinary Courage in Adversity, 1868-1869. As the reception transitioned to a less formal gathering, Cooper maintained vigilant proximity to Sarah, who was clearly reaching the limits of her tolerance for crowds and attention. She had just signaled him with their agreed-upon gesture, touching her medicine pouch twice, when a commotion erupted near the chamber entrance. "Let me through," a man's voice demanded. "I have every right to be here. I survived the same massacre." Cooper moved instantly to Sarah's side, positioning himself between her and the disturbance. Across the room, he saw a bearded man in a serviceable suit struggling against two security officers. "That's him," Secretary Rawlins murmured, appearing at Cooper's elbow. "Hammond. Somehow he obtained entrance credentials." Sarah, rather than shrinking from the disruption, stood straighter, her gaze fixed on the stranger claiming connection to her tragedy. "Who is that man?" she asked quietly. Before Cooper could formulate a protective response, Hammond broke free from the guards momentarily and called out directly to her. "Sarah Thornton, I was there. I saw what really happened. At Blackfoot Pass, your father fired first. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Guests fell silent, all eyes moving between the intruder and the small, composed figure of Sarah standing beside Lieutenant Cooper. What happened next would be reported differently in various newspaper accounts. Some claimed Sarah fled in tears. Others suggested Cooper physically restrained her from approaching Hammond. The truth, as Cooper would later testify, was far more remarkable. Sarah stepped forward, her blue eyes focused intently on Hammond's face. "You weren't there," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the suddenly silent reception hall. "I know every person who was in our wagon train, every face, every name. You weren't with us." Hammond faltered visibly under her direct assessment. "I was scouting ahead," he blustered. "Your father hired me at Fort Bridger." Sarah shook her head once, definitive. "My father hired no scouts. He argued with Mr. Miller about the route. He wanted to take the longer trail to avoid the pass completely." The simple, factual correction delivered with a child's unwavering certainty carried devastating credibility. Hammond's expression shifted from righteous indignation to visible discomfort. President Grant, observing this exchange, signaled to his security personnel. "Remove this man for questioning," he ordered quietly. "It appears we may have an impostor in our midst." As Hammond was escorted from the chamber, Sarah turned to Cooper, her composure finally beginning to crack after the confrontation. "I'd like to leave now," she whispered. Cooper nodded, placing a protective hand on her shoulder as he guided her toward a side exit. "You handled that with extraordinary courage," he told her softly. "I just told the truth," Sarah replied. "The mountains taught me that pretending doesn't help you survive." Later investigations would reveal Ezekiel Hammond as a fraud, a small-time con man who had never been near Blackfoot Pass during the massacre. His political patrons disavowed him quickly, and the attempted deception ultimately strengthened rather than undermined Sarah's credibility. 3 days later, Sarah Thornton arrived in Philadelphia to begin her new life with her mother's sister. Aunt Rebecca proved a compassionate guardian, creating a stable home where Sarah could gradually adjust to conventional society while receiving education appropriate to her intelligence and potential. Lieutenant Cooper maintained correspondence with Sarah throughout her adjustment, providing continuity during her transition. Their letters documented her gradual integration into Eastern life, while preserving her unique perspective and experiences. Sarah's medicine pouch remained with her through these changes, a tangible connection to Running Fox and the wilderness that had both threatened and ultimately shaped her. Though some questioned its appropriateness, Aunt Rebecca wisely recognized its importance to Sarah's emotional well-being and permitted her to keep it. In the autumn of 1876, 7 years after her rescue, 17-year-old Sarah Thornton enrolled at Vassar College, one of the few institutions offering higher education to women at that time. Her application essay, which gained special notice from the admissions committee, bore the title, "Lessons from the Wilderness: What Survival Taught Me About Civilization." Sarah's remarkable journey from massacre survivor to educated young woman embodied the resilience of the human spirit. She never fully conformed to conventional expectations. Her experiences had set her too far apart for complete assimilation. Instead, she created a unique path that honored both her wilderness trials and her civilized opportunities. And somewhere to the west, in territories still contested between two colliding worlds, a Sioux hunter named Running Fox continued his own journey, occasionally sharing with younger tribal members the story of a small white girl with extraordinary courage who had survived alone in the mountains until he followed her impossible trail. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.